Hello and welcome to the pod. It's episode 59, and this is the Adam Gase head coaching hiring special. You can follow the show at Miami Pod, themiamipod.com. I'm joined by Ian Wharton, who you can follow at NFL Film Study
Yep.
and draftcentric.weebly.com and Bleacher Report. And so, yeah, Adam Gase was hired. It's a 5-year deal. He has control of the 53-man roster, and he's going to call plays. So that's kind of what has been confirmed. Then we can talk about kind of the defensive stuff that's speculated a bit later. But what's kind of your initial thoughts on the Gase hiring? And Ian hasn't really been around today because he's had more important things to do. So kind of all of this is fresh to Ian. So it's kind of nice to get more kind of like an instant reaction to news, whereas it's soaked in with me for a bit longer.
Yeah. So first thing, they gave him the 53 power.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty much it's whether it's in a contract or not is basically the only difference. Like, it's
Yeah.
really a 53-man is like you decide who the last special team guy is or who the development player. It's not really
And,
that much power.
yeah. And overall, it's more. I think it's more of a title thing than,
Yeah.
or it's like a tiebreaker thing. I could see that maybe in like the draft room. Maybe
Rhea
it's
has personnel control though, so he has the 90-man roster control.
oh,
So that's quite
okay,
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. But I kind of like that. So it's interesting to me that they really did everything they could to get Gase. Then
Yeah,
um,
there was rumors Giants were going to push for him hard. They had an interview with him
yeah,
tomorrow, and then obviously Philly's second interview. So
and
they
they know this
obviously had
guy.
to pay a bit.
Yeah, and like this was definitely a guy. Teams wanted him. Like, there's no doubt about it. He was the hottest He was the hottest coaching candidate. Period. It doesn't matter coordinator. It doesn't matter retread. There is no doubt about it. He was the hot name. Like, so my hot take is, and it's really not a hot take. It's if people wanted Miami to get the big name, quote unquote, it's a different sense of the big name because they didn't get the proven guy with like 15 years of experience. And again, I liked that aspect as well, depending on who the candidate was. But I also can't sit there and say Miami didn't hit with this hire because this was the guy they wanted. This was their number one target. They didn't have a coach for what, like 13 weeks? So, I mean, they've been doing homework on guys for 4 months. I think it was Lewis Riddick who continues to be butthurt about Bill Lazor getting fired. I mean, Jesus Christ, let it go, dude. You guys sucked in Miami. Um, he was talking about, oh, they just hired him in a heartbeat, and it's like, or how did you know he was your guy after 4 to 5 hours and maybe a second interview? It's like, this team's been talking to people that know him well. There's a lot of connections through Parcells. Gase is,
Gase even said this was the most in-depth interview he's had of through the last 3 years he's been doing interviews, and he
yeah,
had a San Francisco job last year that he turned down because he couldn't pick defensive coordinators. So it's not like that's kind of a promising thing to me. It's like he's not just accepting any job. He's like pretty selective of and wants to have some control. So that's kind of promising in terms of he's going somewhere with stability, and he was really quite positive about Stephen Ross as well, and Stephen Ross being a big factor as why he's there. So that's kind of interesting as well, and getting those 5 years, that's a lot for a coach. But that's obviously, I think that's more of a that was probably leveraged quite a bit, I would imagine.
yeah, and but he was a guy that other teams, were legitimately interested in at some level. Um,
And it's not like there's a cap on head coaching
right.
salary. So the worst that happens is Stephen Ross is paying for two coaches for one period. But it's unlikely that he'd probably get another head coaching gig pretty quickly after. But it's not like a player where you've got to worry about the contract. It's literally just whether the owner wants to be on the string for that money or not.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I mean, I like the hire. I don't think you can love the hire. I also don't think it's fair to hate the hire. We just don't know. We don't know what he's going to be as a head coach. His resume, it lacks experience. I think in terms of ideally you would have a guy that's been around a little longer. But I will also say, on the other hand,
He's
you
been
have to
coaching
worry.
since he was a graduate, though. So you can point to his
Right.
age of being young, but he's not like, to me, you can almost add, like, he could be, if he was a former player, he would be 47 with this experience. So that's kind of like a difference. Like, he's way more experienced than Dan Campbell, even though Dan Campbell's been a head coach in title for 10 games. Like, he hasn't been around coaching and like learning how to coach for as long. So there's kind of like the age is like a deceptive thing because of the route he's taken to become a coach, which is somewhat unconventional, like not even playing in college.
Yeah, and also I would also say there's a tendency in the NFL for the brightest, or maybe I don't really know what the word for it would be, but some of these guys, and we saw it with Josh McDaniels as well. These wonderkins kind of rise to the top quickly, and yes, they can crash and burn. And I did say this about Gase. I think he'll be better possibly in his second job, not necessarily his first head coaching job. But we'll see.
Depends
And I don't know if that's
how
fair.
much
Yeah,
leash he gets as well. If he, I
right.
mean, if he's given the amount of time some coaches are, like it might take him 3 years to work it all out. But given that he's been given a
That's
5-year contract, maybe they'll give him like a couple of years to learn, and then you don't make the mistake of constantly churning over,
yeah.
and you give someone
And he
enough time
should be
to
given,
develop.
yeah, and he should be given 4 years. Honestly, I think I mean, at least 4 years. I just think that this franchise needs that type of stability. You need all these guys on the same page. And I think that's another positive, too, is that they desperately wanted the guy, and the guy seems to be fitting in line very well. And I'll say the one thing with Hugh Jackson is that it was going to be very difficult to hire him from San Fran. It seems like, I guess, everyone kind of understood that San Francisco was a very likely place for him as soon as Peyton stayed in New Orleans. So because he's from the area, I guess, I mean, that's just where he's comfortable. That's where he wants to be. You
Cal,
can't,
USC.
yeah, like you can't stop a guy from going where he wants to go, and that's fine. And I'll also say though, I would almost rather have the quick riser be a first time head coach than a guy who's maybe been stuck as a
Just up and
coordinator
down.
for a very long
I'm not
time.
even
Yeah,
stuck as a coordinator. He's been like not even being able to get coordinator jobs at times. Um,
yeah,
and
that's
he's like,
true.
he's never been a coordinator more than 1 year at one spot, other than this last 2 year spurt with the Bengals. So I mean, there's like some flags. It's not like, I mean, it was kind of funny that people would be hating on Chip Kelly, but then love Hugh Jackson just because Hugh Jackson's like has similar dirt, but it's just not as prominent. So that's kind of interesting. I preferred Gase to Hugh, but I like them both. But
Yeah, I mean, I would have been
Gase
happy
wasn't
with
one of my
both.
favorite, but
Yeah, it was the
I'm
same
definitely
way.
not. Should we talk about kind of offensively how he fits and what you're kind of expecting? To me, I guess like the things that I think we definitely know we'll see is a lot of shotgun. It's been the last 3 years. His offenses have been in the top 4 or 5 in shotgun, top 4 and 5 in no huddle. So I think those are things we'll definitely see. Um,
Hmm.
and those are trends that kind of, regardless, I think would be primarily zone. Denver was mostly zone, although there was spells where um, they went to more gap stuff just because they weren't getting anywhere with the zone running, just because of the backs. Injuries to guys. I think it was when Monty Ball went down, then they had to, was that last year? And then they moved to more of like a gap stuff. Bears were running gap before, so they kind of had to filter in some zone stuff and some trap play. That, like they had some power and some trap plays like left over, but they kind of had similar plays to Dolphins in those pinball sweeps. And kind of like inside outside zone, so kind of a mixture of stuff. I think would see just more of like the Denver playbook in terms of running game, because Gase kind of spoke a lot about fitting the scheme to personnel. So we've talked a lot about Juwan James' limitations in terms of the running game. So I'd assume that's one thing that would be a prominent holdover is the zone scheme. And then I guess just like it's just kind of like a collage of offensive schemes. That's somewhat quoting Dustin Gooden. I can't remember his exact terminology, but it's just kind of like a load of different kind of like West Coast mixed with like the Rams offense from like 10 years ago, mixed with like just like all different levels, loads of screens. There's like jailhouse screens. So it's like a real mixture of things. I think even the terminology is like has its base in West Coast offense, but is then like simplifies or like changed. So have you got any kind of takeaways how you feel like the general scheme will come, or do you think it's going to be just like dependent on matchups, which is kind of a nice thing and something we were like talking about Patricia as well. It's like you're going to have a coach that isn't just stuck in what they do. They'll be a bit more adaptable and look for matchups and self-scout.
Yeah, I mean, the things he was able to do with Denver and then Chicago, and I look forward to looking back through the film a little bit. Be a little bit more critical, pay a little bit more attention to detail. But my takeaway was kind of similar to yours. Whereas I think he adjusts to his personnel pretty well. He'll go through stretches where maybe he's too little reliant on screens and such. But that's really hard for me to say too, because
there's a limitation of the quarterback and
like
well.
Especially Chicago, man. Chicago is trotting out some really horrible guys, and you just don't want those guys going downfield and trying to get separation and trying to win at the catch point when it's like they're not even NFL caliber in the first place. And then if you look at in Denver wanted to do it because they had two tremendous receivers that you just wanted to get the ball into their hands. So,
and didn't have a great running game at times.
Didn't have a great running back. Their offensive line at times was in shatters. Peyton Manning doesn't want to stand in the pocket very long. So, I think he does a good job, and I think that he did a really nice job with Chicago with the running backs. I was very impressed at the type of production that they got with that offensive line from Jeremy Langford and Matt Forte, and obviously it's a good combo. It's a good set of two backs. I think this might help keep Lamar Miller. Big picture, we'll be interested to see if that's the decision that the franchise wants to do.
Eyes wide open emoji with nothing else. So
yeah. I mean, he probably just doesn't know. Yeah, he probably just doesn't know, and that's going to be a conversation that they're going to have here this offseason. Gase is he can do balance. I think that he's not going to be. I mean, we know he's not going to be Bill Lazor.
He was pretty run heavy with the Bears, less so kind of. So I think it was like 55% pass to run ratio, which is like probably in the late 20s in terms of pass, like the amount you're passing. Denver, I think they were more like 60% both years pass to run, which is pretty average. So it would be a better spot for him to run. Yeah. No, that's like the perfect amount for me. It's like you want to be passing 60% of the time, really.
Totally agree. Especially guys with Parker and I think that I'm interested. One thing I am interested to see, and I'm going to go back and see this as best as I can. See if he goes high-low with his reads. So for the quarterback, and what I mean by that is, so if you look at Miami's offense, Miami likes to go low to high. They're going to do the quick check down route. That's their number one read. It's just is Jarvis Landry open on like the crossing route or the really just the upfield. I don't even know what to call it. Really just like an upfield release. And if he is, then get the ball to him. The opposite would be you're looking at the deep route and then transitioning down levels of the field. And hopefully he does. I hope that that's what
at least on a couple of sale concepts, it was high-low.
That's good. I think that'll really help this offense. It creates room for running the ball. It's going to play to the strengths of Devontae Parker. It's going to play to the strengths of Jarvis Landry in terms of creating space for him. So that's what I'm hopeful when I go back and watch his offense.
I remember there was some like Denver playoff games where the field got really condensed and there wasn't much vertical passing, or at least even route run. But I think that's partly down to kind of how Peyton was playing. I think it may have been one of those cold games. So that's kind of something to watch. I think his red zone offense isn't great, especially in Denver. I wasn't really a fan of it. Lots of fades, lots of throwing in front of the red zone on third down, and trying to give it to players to create, because you don't really trust the quarterback to be able to find those spot holes. So yeah, I think if you watch the Bears, at least I watched about 6 Bears and Denver games at the same time, just to kind of look for similarities and differences. And the red zone, especially in the Bears, was really bad. I guess one thing in terms of like people's perception of him, I thought was something that I kind of remember from the offseason is fantasy football people are really down on Forte, and particularly in PPR, because they just thought, because at Denver he never threw to running backs. And I think there's only 3 games this year that Forte played in that he had under 3 receptions. So and when he says he like plays to the strength of the personnel, I think that's a pretty honest assessment in terms of you can't really predict his usage all the time. But I don't think Forte was a perfect back for him really. But we'll see what kind of
and then really it's about how can he adjust the personnel. And we'll see. We'll see.
We talk about, I guess, Landry and Devontae Parker are similar to kind of like Welker and Demaryius Thomas in terms of like roles they could fill.
Yeah.
And then maybe even like Hazel as like that third receiver on the outside, that kind of works. He was really reliant. I see maybe this kind of goes back to the red zone problems. Denver were really reliant on Julius Thomas in the red zone. So then maybe that's something where like either Deion Sims needs to become that. If you can continue off his one good Patriots game, maybe he can become that. Or I don't think really Jordan Cameron's that type of red zone threat. But yeah, that's maybe something to look for as in his red zone. They were so dependent on Julius Thomas to get red zone production at times. Is there anything else really, like scheme-wise or personnel-wise, he thinks of note?
Interested to see what he does at tight end.
It's definitely like contract-wise, and I mean in Denver they lived in 11 personnel, so you only need 1 really.
Yeah.
And the Bears use some 6 tight ends and overusing, 6 O-line overusing blocking tight end as well.
And I know in Denver they use Julius Thomas a lot, just as a receiver. Wasn't really too much of a blocking threat, and so that would fit well for Cameron. And then for Martellus Bennett, who's more of a blocker, but good receiver, but more of a blocker, at least in what they were needing him to be. So that'll be interesting. To be honest with you, I think tight end is starting to look at like one of those positions where it's like, honestly, if Miami spent like a 3rd-round pick on one, I wouldn't even be mad. Just depending on what they want to do with Cameron, because we'll have to see. Cameron may not even be interested in staying around.
He's either going to have to take a pay restriction. Like he's not staying at this current contract. There's got to be, he's either going or the money's changing and he gets more years. I don't know if you really want to commit to more years the way he's played. Although I think he did improve that last week and he looked good the first 4 weeks. But yeah, that's definitely kind of it's a contract that we've been saying the whole time. It's a restructure or a cut. So, and it's not an obvious restructure, and that probably means that you can't. But we'll see. I guess there could be other kind of.
And what did you think of? I actually liked hearing this. Miami brought in Sue and Tannehill to
They didn't bring. Gase kind of expanded on that a bit more.
Okay.
It sounded more like he bumped into them and then had a chat.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Um,
Well, I don't think that's a bad thing, though, at least. I would have
and
actually
yeah,
liked if Miami would have brought them in and actually talked. I think that actually would have been really a
but I think
positive.
that just kind of speaks to kind of like how long Gase was there for. That just like Sue and Tannehill were walking around and bumped into him. But, and there was
Interesting.
kind of
Okay.
reports he met the sports science people and I can't remember who else. But yeah, he said it was the most thorough interview he's had, or one of them. So I think that's kind of a note when people are saying that they were like just throwing shade on the process. And Tannenbaum said something interesting about how since they fired Philbin, they had been doing kind of research into whether first-time head coaches or second-time head coaches and the success rate of different hires. So they kind of looked into the mechanics of the process and the kind of what the odds are of different things, and they got down to 25 names that they were interested in. So that's they like to say they didn't kind of do some homework, I think would be incorrect.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd only looked, I think, back to like 7 or 8 years ago, and it was marginally better where retread or like second time head coaches did marginally better. It was just really
That's enough
situationally
noise in that
based,
as
though.
well.
Yeah. Like it's really hard to account for things. It's like yeah, like you could see a good head coach do poorly just because he went to a terrible situation, or he got fired, or left the situation um, because of ownership issues. Like we can't account for all those things. Like it's really hard to know exactly why someone failed. And if they think that Gase is going to fit in well with their hierarchy and be a part of a team, which it seems, I mean, look, that's what Miami needs. And at least right now, I'm more towards buying that actually being the case than I would be selling it. Now, obviously, it's just like Gase. I'm not sold on him as a great. I don't know if he's gonna be a good coach. He might be a terrible head coach. I don't know. But I'm more inclined to say that he's going to be better than he's going to be awful. And people comparing him to Cam Cameron, to Tony Sperano, Joe Philbin, he is very far from those guys, at least as far as his resume, what he's accomplished, even in just a couple years. He's done things. He's actually built offenses. I mean, Peyton Manning doesn't really. If you look back, like he's not really the type to really praise his coaches. But he's been just over the top with Gase. CK Parrott, Chris Kaufman on Twitter found an article. I don't remember exactly when it was from, but it had dozens of quotes he was tweeting out. Players, coaches, colleagues, with a ton of positive things to say about Adam Gase, and some of that's fluffing, some of that's just someone kissing butt, maybe a little bit, but that's not often. Like you couldn't say those things about Cam Cameron. Cam Cameron was it was a joke, but when he was hired, I mean you could tell like once we found out, not kidding you, the moment I found out Joe Philbin did what he did in Green Bay, what his position was, that's when I soured on him. I said, this guy's just destined to fail. It's not his fault, but it's like he hasn't been in a power of control. And I think that really matters. And then there's other things too. Personality matters. There's a bunch of different things that factor into it. And that's why we don't know who's going to be successful and who's going to fail. But Gase at least is more apt based off his resume to being successful, at least from what I've kind of looked at.
And it's a young offense as well. So then I think having a young head coach, they can kind of grow together, and maybe there's like a less of a generational barrier, or like maybe even a cultural one. Because I think with Philbin, he was loved in Green Bay and didn't really. Maybe they just have kind of like a different culture. It's just like a small town, and then Miami's kind of pretty much the opposite from Green Bay. So then maybe that kind of like the personality of the team is a lot different. So maybe that
And
was
kind of
kind
how
of
the teams were constructed too, I think that could matter. Where Green Bay, they don't bring guys from outside of their system, so their guys are kind of brought up through their own culture. It's easier to not necessarily control, but tame some guys, whereas compared to Miami, obviously, like you said, it's a much different culture because of the location, but also because you're signing guys from other places, and that changes. It's an interesting dynamic when all of a sudden your best players are free agents or from
Yeah,
free
especially,
agency.
and if
That
like
really
the
matters.
first, and for like Green Bay, pretty much everyone's drafted, so their first pro experience is Green Bay, whereas with Miami, it's predominantly free agents, so they've had other experiences, they've already got money and stuff like that, so that you're not kind of molding them as a person as much as well. So maybe that kind of like changes the way in which you need to approach them, and just being like young as well. I think like there's one projected starter, I'd say, over 27 on the Dolphins offense, and that's Brandon Albert. So I mean, it's pretty young team, and like the 27-year-old is Tannehill. So I think that just kind of shows you the age of the team.
Yeah.
So the rumored defensive coordinator is going to be coaching in about, I think, 25 minutes, and that's Vance Joseph. He's the defensive backs coach for the Bengals. He was rumored to go with who Gase wanted to take to San Francisco last year. He's also rumored to be, if the Bengals were to lose their defensive coordinator, he would be promoted there. If Hugh Jackson were to go somewhere, he would want to take Vance Joseph. I think even McDaniels would want Vance Joseph, so he's a popular name. I've been asking around about him for about a week now, and the worst everyone seems to love him. Bengal fans, kind of different media and all different people who I asked stuff to seem to love him. Like the worst I've got is that he might be a head coach soon, so he might not be around for long. That's literally the worst comment I've got from him. So he's kind of interesting in terms of his background. Brought up around like San Francisco, then Wade Phillips with the Texans, where he coached a couple of games when Wade Phillips took over as head coach. So there's been a lot of talk about how whether it'll be a 3-4 or a 4-3. So he's predominantly been in 3-4s. But I guess what's more important is they're one gapping 3-4s. So they're not kind of the same as, they're more similar to a 4-3 than a 3-4 in terms of the importance. To me, what's important in the difference between the fronts is whether they're one gapping or two gapping, and their interior line. So if you're kind of wondering where Sue would play, for example, he's either going to play between the gap of the guards and tackle either side, or like basically a shading nose tackle where he's been most of this year. So there wouldn't be a huge amount of difference. I guess the bigger difference is just the linebackers would be standing, to the edge players are standing up. So that's like, it's not a huge difference. It probably means you wouldn't, if they were to play a 3-4, they wouldn't have OV. I guess one thing that's kind of interesting is Clint Hurt is rumored to be the defensive line coach. And so he's been with the Bears the last 2 years.
Jesus. That dude is like the biggest guy I've ever seen.
There's an amazing picture Rob put up of him next to Charlie Strong, and he makes Charlie Strong look small.
Oh my
but what's
God.
really interesting about Clint Hurt is he was the D-line coach when the year before Gase came to the Bears, and that's when they're four-man front. Then he was outside linebacker coach, so basically the edge coach this year when they're in a three-man front. And when he was rumored, when this kind of leak came out of who the staff would be, he was listed as a D-line coach. So maybe they would be a 4-3 base. But that's just kind of speculating on kind of terminology. And the other stuff that rumored are Matt Burke as a linebackers coach, who's with the Bears as well. I know he's with the Bengals, sorry. And Jerome Henderson, who's interesting. He was with the Browns before. I think 2 days ago had a head coach interview with the Browns, and he's the DB's coach for the Cowboys. So are any of those names, other than Clint Hurt's size, interest to you?
I mean, not particularly, but one
Or
thing I
plans?
kind of got caught with last year is when Cleveland hired John DeFilippo. I looked at that and I was like, why the hell would you hire this guy that no one's ever heard of? Like, he worked with Derek Carr for a year. Carr had a disappointing rookie season, which wasn't necessarily Carr's fault. It was more of the offense that they were running didn't make sense, and they didn't have anybody to really throw to. So I'm not saying that was Carr's fault, but it's like I don't understand like what you could hire him based off of. Turns out John DeFilippo did a really good job, and it's just one of those things where it's like if these are guys he trusts, some of them may work out, some of them may not work out. We don't know, but I'm okay with it. It's it's kind of like Gase in general. It's like okay, like I expected some guys that we wouldn't necessarily know too well.
As Joseph has been like a really hot name. I guess promising things in terms of him is he's a defensive backs coach. I'm going to need a lot of defensive backs.
Yeah, experienced multiple fronts too.
Yeah,
8
so that's
years
kind
in
of
the three
nice.
four, 2 years in the 4-3. So yeah, I mean that to me when I heard that I was like, okay, so maybe we're looking at maybe like a multiple front defense, which
And
actually kind of
uh,
excites me.
yeah, and Drake Kirkpatrick's been really vocal of like how he's helped him.
Yeah,
So that's
played
nice.
kind of well. Yeah, played pretty
Yeah.
well for really his first season of major snaps.
And Matt Burke's been before he was with the Bengals, he was with the Lions as well, linebacker coach. So that's kind of interesting. So that's kind of again like was with Schwartz, so more of a 4-3 as well. So there's kind of like some interesting links into like good young players they've developed. So I think it's an interesting group. It's a pretty young group, but at least like if Jerome Henderson is getting like I know it's the Browns, but it's still getting head coach interviews. That's like promising, and the Browns will know him better than anyone. He was there for the early Hayden years, so
Well,
that's kind of like
technically, no one there knows him.
okay.
I'm just
Oh,
saying, like
the owner?
they've churned. No, not since early.
Wait,
Because he's
okay.
been there since like 2012. So early
Oh,
Hayden.
Hayden does.
Yeah, Hayden
Some of
knows
the
him. That's
players
about it.
do. So the players maybe are vouching for him. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of interesting that there's at least like good players on their resumes. Um, But I think with the defense, there's so much kind of we're going to expect so much turnover that it's kind of hard to say. And that's maybe like another good thing with it being someone who's versatile and similar to Gase, like they'll play to like the player's ability and not force them into a scheme, but with kind of a clean slate, they can kind of do what they like. So it'll be kind of interesting. Um, I quite like what I've heard about Vance Joseph, so it'll be interesting to see. And there's kind of we can also look if you want to look at like a good example of a 4-3 defense moving to if he does bring Wade Phillips defense, then Denver's like a perfect example of that last year with Wade Phillips taking that defense to reunite with Kubiak. So you can see there it's like an easy transition. And I remember there was a Sly Williams interview talking about how there was pretty much the same. It's just like where I had to learn a new position, and that's about it. But he really liked it. He liked playing in it, and he said it was similar to basically the same roles as in the 4-3. So although like people will be able to, like Armando will be able to write things about how they've moved to 3-4, it's only really affecting a couple of players. And there's a really interesting video I posted earlier before Vance Joseph was rumored, and it was him back in 2010, I believe, and just talking about why he likes to run a 3-4, and it's all about how you can play a cover 2 shell, and the offense can't tell where you're bringing edge pressure, so then there is basically putting less stress onto the corners in the secondary by playing that cover 2 shell. And you just have to stop. And basically, his premise was as long as you can stop the run with that 7-man box, then they shouldn't be able to hurt you from their backs, like by passing. So it's just like a simple reason why he likes it. but there's like, it's nice at least when that's like a priority of a coach, or it's like just simple things. But and he also talks about kind of like that makes it easier on your corners, and we're not going to have great corner play next year, regardless of what happens, unless Josh Norman for some reason wants to come to Miami. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to say about the hire? I don't know.
Like I said, just to be clear, where I'm at with it, cautiously optimistic. I think it could be good. It's better than some of the other names that were out there. There's
Is that, I guess there could be like some. Do you think about like Vic? I know a couple of people are pushing Vic Fangio as being a potential DC. Some kind of like speculation he might have like a contract out, and then the other would be if the Lions are still talking about maybe head coach change, so then Terrell Austin could maybe be without a job. And when Terrell Austin was going for the Atlanta job last year, he was bringing Gase as an offensive coordinator if he got that, and Gase didn't get a head coaching job. So that could be like another connection. Would you kind of prefer either of those two options? Obviously, Fangio brings a bit more experience.
Yeah, I mean, if Miami could hire Fangio or Austin, I think all of a sudden that turns, kind of like and it's nothing against Vance Joseph. I just don't know much about him or much to work off of there. That makes you feel a lot better about the hire because it makes you feel, okay, this is a guy that can really put together maybe a nice staff.
Terrell Austin's got a lot of connections with players as well in Miami.
My only concern with Austin is he's probably going to be a head coach in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So
next year probably, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm surprised he didn't get one this year, to be honest.
He still could. There's still 6 jobs out there.
Yeah, he could, I guess. He hasn't really been. I don't think he's been like the hot name for any of them. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
Miami is the hottest, yeah.
Yeah, he was from Miami, and he deserved it. I think he's going to be possibly a pretty good head coach. But that would be my concern with Austin.
Fangio, I guess my feeling is you can't really worry about
right, because that's a good thing.
A year ahead. If that, like, you should always be worrying about, like, it should always be in your back of your mind that your coordinators could be getting a head coaching job because you want to be successful, and that's what happens to good teams.
Right. So it is a good thing. Fangio, the nice part with him is he's a career coordinator. I don't think he'll ever be a head coach just based off of, he's gotten this far. He's been very successful. For whatever reason, he may have just plateaued.
I don't think the Bears will let him go cheaply. He would have to want out, and then whether he
I don't know why they let him out. Yeah.
I've been told there's like a way out, but whether he would want to exercise that or not to go to Miami, I'm not sure. Right.
So, I mean, if they got one of them, it'd be awesome. I'm not gonna lie, it would be awesome. Big fans of both of them, but I'm not gonna be bummed if it's Vance Joseph either. We've talked a lot about Cincinnati being a model of a franchise. What I think Miami needs to try to become as far as how they build and how they replace talent. And so, I know Coyle didn't work out, but Zimmer's been a hell of a coach for Minnesota. And so every guy is different. Even if they had the same position, even if they came from the same coaching tree, every guy's a little bit different. What they want to do when they finally have more control, that shows their personality. It shows what they've done. And not everything – it's not – and like we talked about too, it's not like he's only from Cincinnati. He's got a lot of different influences on him, most notably Mike Nolan, Wade Phillips are the two guys that he spent time under. So, there's going to be other influences to his game. So I'm not down on the Joseph potential hire, but obviously it's easier to just side with a guy like Austin or Fangio because those guys are home runs.
Do you think there's a reason why a lot of defensive coordinators are former defensive back coaches? I guess my like initial thought would be is like they actually have to care about what's happening in front of them, whereas defensive line coaches not so much.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. Um, maybe it's just coincidence. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe it's just coincidence, and it's just kind of who you trust and who's available. That may be part of it. But yeah, I mean, Casey Rogers would be,
Yeah. I was
that'd be
surprised
the
his
guy
name
to sum
wasn't
up.
linked with Miami. Um,
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, no one even talked about him. That is kind of strange.
maybe because
Like no
it's
one
one
talked about.
year, or
Yeah,
so maybe it's just
maybe
like a bit too soon.
maybe he didn't interview well either in the past.
Perhaps.
Is
I
that
don't think he's really had many interviews. I know they denied him a couple of times. But yeah, so it's interesting. Maybe it's just one year as a coordinator, and then so that maybe he'll start getting more interest next year, because he's only been a D-line coach before that. So maybe that's kind of why. But players always seem to like him, so that's kind of interesting. Um, is there anything defensively? Like, so if they went to a three-man front, even with a one gap, I think they'd still need more defensive line help and edge help. Is there someone kind of in the draft or free agency you would approach for either that, or anyone like 0 to 5 technique? I think they probably need anyone that can play any of those positions, or any edge guys that would stand out to you.
so? Let me bring up my article that I've got.
So I guess like DeAndre
Hold on.
Coleman, his value kind of rises a bit more because he can play 5 technique. He did so for the Jags in preseason. So he can play 5 techniques, basically heads up over the tackle. So I think his value would rise a bit more. I guess maybe Chris McCain becomes more useful, but maybe he just can't play. We don't really know.
Yeah, I think a guy like maybe like Malik Jackson, um, edge rusher
Where's
from
Rashad
Denver.
Jelani Jenkins? How do you think he plays at that will inside linebacker? Do you think he
I think it's a good fit.
is it not too much of a
Yeah,
change?
no, I think that'd be good. I think that he's a
Bit
pretty
more
natural
space
fit.
in coverage.
Yep, more of a very clear role for him. I'm actually a pretty big fan of that fit, and
Would have to
potentially
take
what
on
you
blockers a little bit more, maybe. But then he
possibly.
also gets to penetrate A gaps more, which is funner.
Yes,
And like,
yeah, I think he does pretty well at that too. It depends on who's in front of him too, what they can put in front of him. It's a good draft though for defensive line. It's a very good draft for defensive line, and it's also if you're going to move to a 3-4, I think now's the time to do it. In terms of you're going to be able to get Reggie Ragland at number 8, and yes, you're paying a premium for an inside linebacker that maybe you don't want to do, but just like with the kid CJ Mosley in Baltimore, it's like
Mosley was better though.
yeah, I agree. But the way this draft class
Yeah,
has
it's not a great
shaped up,
draft. Yeah.
it's almost one of those situations where it's like I'm gonna bite the bullet in this situation. I'm going to because if Miami misses out, there's a good chance Miami's going to miss out on all the elite talents. Um, there's at least a decent chance of it. Let me not say there's a good chance. There's a decent chance. And if that's the case, you may be sitting there where it's like, okay, do you want Treadwell or do you want Reggie Ragland? And it's like I can easily justify saying Reggie Ragland's still a very solid inside linebacker prospect. It's an easy scheme fit. He's going to fit right in. He slides in.
That's like a Ravens pick as well, type
It
pick.
is. It is. It's that's what a solid franchise does. Like sometimes you just have to bite the bullet, take the non, and I don't. I just want to be clear. I'm almost always team talent over team need, but there are some fits that are just so perfect that you just overlook it a little bit. Like you overlook the the little bit in talent difference. And Miami just has such a big need at linebacker, especially if you're moving to 3-4 to get one of those types of linebackers. And Ragland's so perfect for the role that I'm good
Yeah.
with it. I'm
And
good with
if you're going to a cover 2 shell, you need that
Oh,
linebacker more
absolutely,
than anything else. And
absolutely, and
the corner and that free safety is somewhat devalued.
yeah, which is a good thing. It's actually a good thing for Miami if they can do that. Um, yeah, I mean that's who I'd be looking at. It's not a great free agency class. I think a lot of these guys are going to get re-signed because there's a ton of money available. When there's a ton of money available, that means, it's not really good for buyers, especially in the NFL system where it's like, and you can re-sign your guys pretty reasonably and consistently. Now, a guy in free agency too, they may try to pursue if Vance Joseph is the DC. Adam Pac-Man Jones from Cincinnati. I don't think Cincinnati will let him go. I think they're going to do their best to keep him around. He's 30 years old, so you're looking at a very short-term deal. But if Miami thinks that they're going to be competitors in the next couple of years, which I wouldn't be surprised, then Jones would make sense. He tested very well in coverage productivity in 2015 or 2014. 2015, just from what I've seen of him, I think he's going to test fairly well again. Probably like a high to medium end number 2. And if you're keeping Grimes or just like restructuring Grimes in a cover 2 defense, you can make it work with those guys, at least be competent on the outside. So it's something to consider just based off of who the DC is.
All right, well, I think unless you have any more Gase comments, should we bugger off?
Yeah, no, I think we're good.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll have some more Gase things. I think we're going to have someone back on who watches a lot of Bears football to talk about Gase, and then once we get confirmation on like more of the stuff, we'll kind of dip into more of them and how we think team might look before free agency and draft, and hopefully we'll be able to work out what they'll actually be running. I guess we haven't really touched on Gase calling plays. To me, that's good. There's like clarity and accountability within that, so there's not really going to be like any mess. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah. I mean, that would make sense.
And I guess we're going to get real clarity in terms of Tannehill's ability at the line of scrimmage, because that's been like a big consistent in Gase's offensive coordinating. Is like that's the main reason why they go up tempo. They're not getting snaps off in 20 seconds. They're getting to the line of scrimmage and standing around talking for a while to get the best play. So I think we'll see how much mentally Tannehill can handle pretty early on.
Yeah, and that's pretty exciting. That's one thing I'm definitely looking forward to as well.
All right. Well, because we can never end the show when I actually say we're about to end it. Thanks for listening, and you can follow the show at Miami Pod, themiamipod.com. Can subscribe iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean, and follow Ian at NFL Film Study, draftcentric.weeby.com, and find his work at Bleacher Report all off season. And I'm Oscar Hazel. Don't follow me, and we will probably have an episode later in the week. So thanks for listening, and enjoy, if you're listening to us live, Pittsburgh win. All right, goodbye.